Welcome, scholars. Dr. Cobb here. Hope everyone's having a great day. Just want to take a moment to talk to you a little about organizational culture, socialization, and mentoring, and how that's an important factor when we think about businesses and structures, and how we can use those things to really motivate our employees, really set a standard, and kind of bring everyone together so we can be efficient and effective. So organizational culture, we can look at this as a set of shared, taken for granted, implicit assumptions that a group holds and that determines how it perceives, thinks about, and reacts to its various environments. And we can look at four particular important areas when we talk about characteristics, such as it's a shared concept, it's learned over time and influences our behavior at work and impacts outcomes at multiple levels as well. And we have to remember when we think about organizations, we're bringing in all these different cultures into our organization, and that kind of manifests itself into one overall culture. So we want to make sure we set the tone on that, what we want it to look like, what we want it to be. We want it to be inclusive. We want to make sure we take advantage of everyone's background, personality, and culture to really give us a better competitive advantage against our competitors who may not be doing it as well. So we get all these different viewpoints at the table. So as we see here, we kind of have a breakdown. It kind of provides a conceptual framework for understanding the diverse backgrounds, some of those drivers and effect when it comes to organizational cultures. And we can see 5 elements of drive here. So we've got the founder's values. So, who sets it up, that traditional day one, this is what we're doing. This is kind of our outlook, what we want to be. This is kind of the culture that we're aiming for. Next, we've got the industry and business environment. We've got the national culture, the organization's vision and strategies, and the behaviors of leaders. So organizational culture influences type of organizational structure adopted by a company and a host of internal processes implemented in the pursuit of organizational goals. So organizational structure and the internal process then affect a variety of groups and social processes, which impact employees' work attitudes, behaviors, and variety of organizational outcomes. So a lot of different things go into that organizational culture. There's a lot of drive to it. So you've got all those different backgrounds and personalities that come into it. Depending on what country you may be hosting a particular factory in or organization in, it's going to be a driver as well. There's a lot that goes into it when we're trying to set the tone and we're trying to develop a specific type of organizational culture that we want. So there's a lot of things that we have to think about and consider. So organizational culture operates on 3 levels. So we've got the observable artifacts, espoused values, and basic underlying assumptions. So each level varies in terms of outward visibility and resistance to change, and each level influences another level. So if we look at level 1, observable artifacts, these are the physical manifestations of an organization's culture. So artifacts are those most visible level of culture. They include such things as dress, awards, myths, stories told about organization, published lists of values, observable rituals and ceremonies. Maybe it's a special parking space or decorations. So a lot of different things that kind of set the culture, that kind of a visible, observable, as it mentions here, of things that we can see that are going to be drivers for the culture, that kind of set that cultural background for the organization. That level 2 is that espoused values. So it's important to distinguish between values that are espoused versus those that are enacted. So when we're talking about espoused values, they're the implicitly stated values, norms that are preferred by organizations. So values are generally established by the founder of a new or small company and by top management team in a large organization. These values represent aspirations that are explicitly communicated to employees, managers, and hope that those values will directly influence employees' behavior. But this does not always happen. So this is what I want. This is what I want our values to be. This is what we're aiming for. This is what we want to have happen. Not necessarily that doesn't always happen, doesn't take place, doesn't happen consistently, but it's kind of, this is what's written down, this is what we're aiming for and trying to strive to be. And then we have enacted values, so the values and norms that actually are exhibited and covered into employees' behavior. So enacted values kind of represent the values that employees ascribe to an organization based on their observations of what occurs on a daily basis. It's important for managers to reduce gaps between espoused and enacted values because they can significantly influence employees' organizational behavior. So think about that new employee who comes in. They're new, they're trying to get an understanding of how the organization works, they're trying to learn their job and what's going on around them, and then they're also seeing those demonstrations of how other workers behave. they're picking up on their values and the value system being kind of shown by these other employees. So it's important that you have that strong organizational structure. You have those employees, modeling the way. So when the new employee comes in, they understand fairly quickly what the values are, what the aspirations are, what the expectations are when it comes to values. And then lastly, we've got the basic underlying assumptions. Our organizational values that have become so taken for granted over time that they become assumptions that guide organizational behavior. So basic underlying assumptions represent deep-seated beliefs that employees have about their company and thus constitute the core of organizational culture. So these basic underlying assumptions are highly resistant to change. More companies have basic underlying assumptions about sustainability and that sustainability piece. So a company's ability to make a profit without sacrificing the resources of its people, the community, and the planet as a whole. So we see organizational culture here at the center, and we see some other important aspects when we think about organizational culture. So we want to establish organizational identity. We want to encourage collective commitment. We want to ensure social system of stability. And we want to act as sense-making device, so helping members make sense of their surroundings by helping employees understand why the organization does what it does and how it intends to accomplish its long-term goals. So these are some things to think about that play a part in organizational culture, trying to get that buy-in from employees to make sure that we're working towards that direction. So organizational culture is related to a measure of organizational effectiveness. Innovation and quality can be increased by building characteristics associated with plan. Financial performance is not strongly related to organizational culture. It benefits more than it hurts, though, when you have a strong organizational culture. And market cultures tend to have more positive organizational outcomes as well. So 4 truths about cultural change. Leaders are the architects and developers of organization's culture. Changing culture starts with targeting one of 3 levels of the organization. So we've got that culture. So remember, we talked about observable artifacts, espouse values, and basic underlying assumptions. So these are the kind of 3 areas that we can take a look at to try and affect. And then we can talk about the vision. So that vision being a long-term goal that describes what an organization wants to become. And the strategic plan outlines the organization's long-term goals. So, this is what we want to do. And then this is the kind of the plan of action we're going to take to make it happen, to make it come to fruition. We also have organization socialization. So this is kind of the process by which individuals acquire the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors required to assume a work role. So, your interactions with your fellow employees, the knowledge you take away, their experiences, that you make your experiences to kind of adapt to the situation using past experiences and information to hopefully be more successful. So a model specifies behavioral and affective outcomes that can be used to judge how well an individual has been socialized as well. So, think about how much information you might garner from a handbook or training, and then how much information that you get from, interacting with other employees, sharing those stories and those artifacts, those past experiences. How much more knowledge do you get from that interaction as opposed to just reading from a manual, if you will. So managers should avoid haphazard sink or swim approach to organizational socialization because formalized socialization tactics possibly affect new hires. So, when you're training an employee, you want to stick them with your best employee, right? So they pick up those best habits, that best organizational culture and ideas. So they really have a person modeling the way for them. So they understand what the expectations are from your best employee. So that bar can really be set as far as what they're aiming for. And those really good practices and training and past experience and that knowledge share is really important. So organizations can also use a mentoring program to get this done as well. So career function of mentoring includes sponsorship, exposure and visibility, coaching, protection, and challenging assignments. So there's a lot of different positives here when we mentor someone. And this is an area that, kind of gets left behind. So, you can think about that training process, which is a form of mentoring if you're sticking an employee with a current person or current employee, having that knowledge share. That mentoring process is kind of long term. It really looks at the career of the employee, not just the training the specific task. I'm going to show you how to make a widget, and then that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Mentoring is more, okay, you know how to make the widget, but how do you move up in the company? How do you remain valued to the company? How do you sustain yourself here? How do you get those promotions and those special assignments? What's your goal here? What's the end goal here for you at this company? That's what I want to help you with. I want to help provide you that guidance as you move along the career here, so you can continue to be successful as you move along from step to step to step. So mentoring process of forming and maintaining intensive and lasting developmental relationships between a variety of developers and a junior person. Mentoring contributes to creating a sense of oneness by promoting the acceptance of organization's core values throughout the organization, provides networking, really, connects that employee, creates loyalty from that employee as well, as they want to stay there. They're being mentored. Their organization is looking at them as a long-term asset. Not just someone who can, quickly be gone in a year or two, or who can move on to another company in a year or two. The company is showing value in them. They're mentoring them. They want them to be there long term, and they want them to be prepared for that next promotion, or that next experience that might become available by having this ready to go training, by having this mentoring that's already taken place. So mentoring is a really great program that a lot of organizations tend to fall short on sometimes. So organizational culture, socialization, and mentoring is a really important part when we think about organizational behavior. Lots of advantages here and opportunities for an organization to be efficient and effective. The drawback here is, of course, it costs money, time, and resources to make this happen. And you see that on the bottom line, right? I'm going to lose X amount of production today because I've got two employees doing the same thing because they're training or mentoring each other. I've got two employees offline not contributing to production today because they're doing this, and that comes straight off my bottom line. I can see that. But the long-term benefits of this, don't necessarily show up somewhere on the bottom line where it's clear cut, but there's a ton of long-term benefits here that really helps the bottom line. It's just harder to pinpoint where those benefits are. It's harder to say we increase profits by X amount of dollars because this happened. But in reality, we didn't lose X amount of dollars, or we didn't lose downtime, or we didn't, a hiccup occurred, but we were able to quickly overcome it because we have these training programs, because we have these mentoring programs. So instead of it costing us 3 or 4 days of production, it actually costs us 1 day of production. So we don't see that on the bottom line showing the difference between what it would have cost us and what it did cost us, because we have a great mentoring program and training program. So businesses sometimes have a hard time dedicating resources and time to these type of mentoring and training programs because, the initial cost shows up on the bottom line, but those, benefits of those trainings don't necessarily show up on the books, but they're there, and they definitely outweigh the cost of the training and the mentoring program to begin with. So there's some really broad strokes here about organizational culture, socialization, mentoring I wanted to share with you guys. Hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you later.